I am unashamed. What about you?
Welcome back to Unashamed. We're super excited today. Got a guest coming on later that we love and adore. But I have to ask you, Jay, so you've been talking on the last couple of podcasts about being a bachelor. So did your wife ever make it home?
No, but this is...
I'm waiting on the edge of my seat to find out.
This is arrival day, so she's coming. She called me last night. We actually feel this will be funny for you. We talked 1 hour on the phone last night.
Yeah, that's funny for me, all right. I've never done that.
I'm just saying, if you've been married almost 33 years and you talk for an hour, you know, that's a good sign.
That's a good sign.
She was like flirting with me.
And it means you're missing her, too.
Oh, we're missing each other. And I just confessed. I was like, babe, she's like, how's it going? And I'm like, I don't even know. I can't remember. I can't keep up with anything.
I'm a disaster.
I left my Bible. I told her that story. And she was actually having dinner with our two sons and, my oldest son's wife, and my younger son's got a girlfriend. And there was some high-level celebrities that I'm not going to mention that like just came by and they had a conversation. Well, it was like we keep saying this poor girl that's dating my son. She's like, what in the world is going on here? You know, because the first time I met her, we were at the award show.
Right.
And so it's like, I'm hoping I'm not hurting the chances with my son to find a girlfriend, because it's like, this is too high profile. It's an illusion. It just so happens every time she's around us, it's a crazy environment, and we're just normal people.
I think she's not believing you're normal people anymore.
Yeah, so anyway, it's a good day. It lifted my morale. I miss my wife, so
was it a flirty conversation, or?
It was.
I mean, not to get too much into your business, but
yeah, I think it's a good sign. I actually hung up and thought, this is a good sign. If you're still
after all these
being romantic after 33 years,
that's a good sign.
Yeah, I just thought you'd get a kick out of that, Phil.
Yeah.
Well, and that's like, so we're back and forth a lot to Gulf Shores, and people are like, why do you keep going down there? It's like, because that's where my woman wants to be. She loves selling real estate. She wants to be down there. And so I'm like you. I don't function well. It's not like I can't go into we're going to live in separate houses and just meet every once in a while. It's like functionality is a big part of the situation. I'm with you 100%. Dad, you told us. You said, boys, never leave without your woman and your Bible. That was one of your parting words of advice when we got married.
That's it.
It's been pretty good. It's held up pretty well.
Well, and grandkids give you, especially when they're young, it just changes your perspective, you know. I mean, my wife, she's just a trooper. I mean, she's just pouring into those grandkids. And it's difficult, having a young baby, but when you have two that are literally almost 9 months apart, I mean, that's a handful.
Yeah.
So she just wants to help out.
Right. Well, and you miss them. I mean, like being a part of them, they do so many different things. You want to be a part of that. So we've had the pleasure of being around ours most of the time, which has been good. Well, good. Well, I'm glad you said you were going frog hunting. You're not going to do that like right when she gets back, huh?
I am doing that tonight, but I cleared that because
I was going to say, that's a little bit of a faux pas if you have all the anticipation. There's like, oh, by the way, I'll see you at 3 a.m.
Well, and I was mindful of that, and so I brought it up. But you got to realize, I've explained many times all the differences in our relationship, and if you have the big things in common, obviously Jesus and a love for your children.
Correct.
And remember the infamous list when the last time she was on here, when she brought out the 10 things we have in common. And it was actually, she kind of convicted me. I was like, yeah, I need to be more positive and open. I mean, she won that.
You had said on record for quite a while that the only thing you and her have in common is Jesus.
And she took issue with that, and she obliterated me and kind of blindsided me in that. But I'm thankful for it now. Sometimes you got to be called out. But what I was going to say is, my wife, she goes to bed at 9 o'clock. I mean, I go to bed at way after that, no matter what. And so it actually doesn't affect anything because really frog hunting gets going good about 9:30. So,
Right. Because you got to wait till it gets dark. You got.
I mean, yeah, it's like, so I'll be catching some frogs tonight. First time this year. You know, they came.
But you will be bringing the bounty to the reunion because you're bringing the fresh frog legs. Which
She's excited about.
Oh, there's nothing better.
There's
Is there
nothing
anything better? I hadn't had a good frog leg in years. I mean, that's
Most of our audience probably they're not tuned in to how many frogs did you catch last night.
There's a few that are, because there's some people in South Louisiana that listen to this podcast. I guarantee you they know about frogs.
But here's the deal. Me kind of bringing that up in the conversation the day she's coming home, I could tell that I scored a lot of points.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was like, look.
I'm saying you're
'cause I
bringing
said,
something.
when are you coming home? And she's like, well, I'm coming home tomorrow, which is today. And I was like, well, I had me a frog hunt scheduled, but obviously, you know, it's not like a check with you situation, but it's just like I had that on the schedule because I wasn't sure when she's coming home.
Well, we have
She said-
established.
Well, she said that's perfect because, you know, you'll leave and I'm asleep. So I was like, oh, this is fantastic.
Well, Jace has already established on the podcast that he and everybody's relationship is different, but in their relationship, part of going out and catching crappie or frogs or delicious wild game, they in his marriage they call that foreplay. So, so just I mean, right? I mean, that's you've established that.
I mean, I've been trying to say there is a lot of women out there who appreciate a guy that can provide, especially in wilderness settings. Because everybody in their back of their mind, they're like, what happens if, you know, the equivalent of the zombie apocalypse does happen?
Yeah.
And what do we do? Well, she has some security in that.
All right.
She's like, this guy will go into places that humans don't roam, and he will find a way to find something to eat and provide. So, look.
It's a family plan. We're all coming down here. We're surrounded by three sides of water. If it's the zombies, they can't get across the water. So
I mean, really, we were organic before that became something cool.
Yeah, we started organic.
Yeah, I've been watching Chicken in the Yard. You know, this is kind of how you function.
So we're in Luke 8 is where we're going to be today in our text, and we talked about in the early part of this about the parable of the sower and the soils. We got into that. We also had the situation with Jesus' earthly family. They were still in the dark, you know, on who he was and where he was. In the last podcast, we talked about him displaying this authority over the storm and the nature, and even then, sometimes how they missed him. And so he's crossing the lake to get to this other region that's kind of a more of a Greek region. And so I've been teasing that we're going to bring in a special guest who, to us, in our opinion, probably has written the best definitive book on spiritual warfare that's out there. It's called Seeing the Unseen. Joe Beam. And so we're going to take a break. We come back on the other side of the break. Joe's going to be with us, and we're going to talk about this text, but also just spiritual warfare in general and whatever else Joe wants to talk about. So let's take a break. So, guys, would it be safe to say that the business world has changed just a little bit from back when we were doing Duck Commander 30 years ago? It's kind of hard for us to wrap our brains around just how much has changed. And Dad, you talk about this a lot just in terms of technology and everything else. One of the groups that's one of our sponsors is called NetSuite. And they're a great example of how much has changed because they're about bringing everything together under one house to be able to deal with everything. And so, of course, we weren't thinking that way because we just didn't have the technology or anything that these guys have. NetSuite gives you the visibility, the control you need to make faster decisions. They've got this brand new deal, which is really great. For the first time ever in their 25 years as the number one cloud financial system, they're offering a full NetSuite implementation for 6 months, no payment, no interest for 6 months. You can take advantage of this special financing today, and they're going to take everything you need in real time and put it in one place. Reduces manual processes, boosts your efficiency, builds your forecast. It also increases your productivity across every department. So check it out. 36,000 companies have already upgraded to NetSuite, helping them have more control over financials, inventory, HR, e-commerce, everything you need. If you've been sizing NetSuite up to make the switch, then you know this deal is unprecedented. No interest, no payments. Take advantage of this special financing offer at netsuite.com/Phil. netsuite.com/Phil to get the visibility and control you need to weather any storm. That's netsuite.com/Phil. So welcome, Joe B., one of our favorite guys, to the Unashamed podcast. Jace thought we talk about you so much, Joe, that Jace thought you'd already been on the podcast.
Well, I had to remember the idea we were talking about spiritual warfare.
Right.
We were both rereading his book. And I talked about him so much that people were bumping into me, and they were like, boy, I really appreciate you turning me on to Dr. Beam's book. So I can't remember anything. My wife's been out of town. What can I say?
So, Joe, welcome to Unashamed.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much.
So I have to say right off the bat, Joe, before we get into the spiritual warfare stuff, so we're friends. We've met. We've done some ministry stuff together. So we have a close relationship with you and Miss Alice and Kimberly, your youngest daughter, and you guys, without knowing it, like most people that put themselves out there and put their story out there, you had a huge impact on Lisa and I, on our marriage. You had written a book. Of course, we were connected to Howard Books because that's Corey's family. And then they eventually published all of our books, most of them as well, even after they got bought out. And so they published your stuff. And so we kind of knew about you through that because they used to be here in West Monroe. And whenever Lisa and I, our marriage was a wreck, Phyllis Boltinghouse, a mutual friend of ours, who was an editor there, she told Lisa and I both, she said, you have to read this book called Forgiven Forever that Joe Beam wrote. And I think it's just what you guys need. And so at the time I was so raw because we were split up, we were just in crisis. And I couldn't read it at first, it was just too raw for me. But Lisa started reading it with some friends in a group, and it was life-changing. First for her, just because of you being so open in there. And then later I did read it cover to cover, coming back on an airplane from Germany. And it was, other than the Bible, I tell people it's the most impactful book I've ever read. And so wow. I just want to say that up front, that you've had a huge impact on us. You and Alice allowed us to talk about your story in our last book, Desperate Forgiveness, which we appreciate. So before we get into the spiritual warfare stuff, what you do with marriage, and I want you to tell our folks a little bit about what you're doing. Marriage Helper is tremendous in helping a lot of marriage. So tell the folks a little bit about kind of what you guys are doing now and a little bit about Marriage Helper.
Okay, I'll give the brief version. We work mostly with marriages in crisis. We do it in a couple of 3 different ways. One is we do this intensive weekend that is amazing about what God does in those 3 days. And we have seen so many marriages turn around. Our success rate, we've been doing that weekend since 1999. And typically about 3 out of 4 couples that go through there wind up turning their marriage around and saving the marriage. And what makes that really significant is that about 9 out of 10 couples that come through there, one of them is done. It's like, this is over. We don't want this to last. Just, I'll go through this 3 days so my spouse will give me what I want and the divorce, and then I'm out of here. So it's a God thing, even though it's not a preaching event. Yeah. It's a God thing, and it works extremely well. One of my psychiatrist friends, who is a Christian, said, Joe, I know it's from God. And I said, really, Charles? How do you know? He said, because you just aren't that smart, Joe.
Well, I don't know. I might beg to differ with that one. So it's marriagehelper.com. I looked up the website last night. And I say that because we have a lot of young families and young couples that listen to the podcast. I know a lot of them are in different varying degrees of struggle because we get emails from you guys. And so it's a great option. You need to check it out, especially to see what they offer. And we highly recommend it. We have sent several couples Joe and Alice's way. And I think it's the reason it's so successful, Joe, in my opinion, is because you guys are so open about you've been there, you know, and it's the same thing. Obviously, Lisa and I are almost 25 years now, you know, removed from our sort of healing and recovery of our marriage that you guys helped us with. And we're the same way. People are open to talk to us because we've been there. We understand what it is. We understand what it is to have infidelity. And so I think that's one of the key, as well as just, you know, the people you have around you are fantastic as well. So I highly recommend what Joe and Alice and Kimberly and those guys are doing. So just
that's why you were asking me about my marriage and all that.
Yeah, well, so we were talking about Jason, which you were listening in, Joe. I don't know. That may be a whole case study.
Well, it was. The last time I saw Jason's wife, she asked me for a new copy of Seeing the Unseen, so I'm not really sure exactly what was in her mind.
I was probably to blame for that, but no, she did. She was doing some kind of home Bible study group with some women, and she used your book, and she didn't realize that you had revised that. So, which I was curious, when did you first write that book, Seeing the Unseen?
The first version came out in 1994.
Okay, and then you revised it. I guess the one she got you to sign
Around 2000.
Was 2000?
Yeah.
2000 something, yeah.
2003 maybe, something like that. Yeah.
Did you do that just to think, oh, I've studied some more and I've come up with some things I want to put in there, or?
No, I did that because the publisher said you will do that.
Because it needed a fresh coat of paint. That's why.
Kind of like being married.
So, Joe, here's another little caveat that I've told you before that you didn't know. And so the publishers, obviously being next door to the church, back when the book was published, I was doing a lot of small group ministry back then. And that's what I was mainly doing for White Street Road because I was kind of an associate. And so they said, we got this great book. Would you read it and then write some discussion questions for it? And I said, well, yeah. They said, this Dr. Joe Beam, you know, and this is all before, you know, we needed your other help from your other book. And I said, yeah, sure. And so I read it and I was just so amazed. It was so good and made me think in some directions I had never thought. And then I got to write some discussion questions that went at the end of the book. And so you never knew who did that, but I have told you since that was me. So I kind of have a little small role in Seeing the Unseen.
Yeah. And it's cool. And I want to say, you know, a lot of times you may say, well, you have a guest, you're trying to promote this book. We're talking about a book that he wrote over 20 years ago, but I'm not a big book reader either. But that is top 3 books that I've read that stopped me in my tracks, and I've used countless, thoughts, and because really I like books that make you think, and there's no doubt there's a spiritual war going on. So it was really insightful, and I appreciate your courage to write it.
Yeah, and 30 years ago it was probably even more.
It was pretty controversial.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was way more controversial than it would be today.
I wish we would have known
Especially
each
for
other.
all of us coming out of the heritage we came out of. I'm sure you got a lot of grief back in the day.
But I've learned just that's not necessarily a bad thing, you know.
Right.
I mean, we just read in Luke 6, you know, it's when he was giving you the blessing when people hate you and exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man.
So I'm going to ask you this, Joe, to kind of get us going, because I want to get to this text, which we're studying in Luke 8. But in the book, it's kind of in the middle section. So I want to kind of set a little bit of this up in terms of spiritual warfare. First, just from our audience's perspective, why did you write Seeing the Unseen? I mean, what kind of motivated you to write a book about spiritual warfare?
Well, actually, I had been in ministry for 15 years. Alice and I had married when we were in college. And then 15 years into our ministry, I left Alice for another woman, obviously a very sinful relationship. Went off and lived in a sinful relationship for 3 years. Alice and I divorced. Finally came to my senses, got to the bottom of the pig pen, I guess you'd say, and asked Alice if she'd take me back. And she did. So we remarried each other after 3 years of divorce. And a couple of years into that, we remarried in 1987. So 7 years after that, in 1994, is when I finally wrote that book. And it was for me. I had made a list of 20-something questions thinking, okay, I take full responsibility for my actions. I made every decision. The devil didn't make me do anything. But I wonder if I had any help. And so I wrote down those 20-something questions and went looking for Bible answers. and those became the original chapters of the original book. So I wrote it for me. I wrote it for me trying to figure out, Paul said we're not ignorant of Satan's schemes. And I thought, Paul wasn't, but I sure was. And I wanted to know what they were if they came again.
Well, and I think that's why it's so powerful. I think because it was so personal, because I'm reading it again right now, and it's been a few years since I've read it. And, I don't remember specifically, there's a part you talk about, which we'll talk about a little bit later, demonization versus demon possession. And, just reading that again this time, all these years later, I can personalize so much mine and Lisa's struggles and her struggles and how this works, the demonic manipulation of a person. They're not necessarily possessed, but the demons are definitely working on their lives. And so when I read that, I thought, man, it again brought it so clear. And so in my case, 25 years later, I can still crystal clear see the demonic work. And currently we're working with a couple of couples where there's been an affair. And I see this same thing at work. I see the trap. I see the delusion. I see all of it. And so I really think it's interesting. You told me one time that you wrote this book kind of on the publishers really wanted this book, but you wanted to write a book about forgiveness as well. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of got a 2-book deal. And those are the 2 books that have impacted me so much. So it's kind of interesting how much they tie together. And I wanted you to tell that. So first, to begin with, I want to talk just a little bit about that before we get to this text, because you talk about in the book, out of Ephesians 4:18-19, the kind of the master strategy of what Satan does and kind of how he works against us. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because to me, that kind of sets the stage for what he's trying to do in Ephesians 4:18-19. I'll read it. It says, it starts in verse 70. So I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality as to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lust for more. So tell the audience a little bit, Joe, just how that kind of is the whole strategy, sort of from the demonic side and what they're trying to do.
I think it's pretty evident if you just listen to the news. It's what's happening here. The futility of their thinking. Let's first of all confuse people and the way they think, because if we can confuse them about what's right and what's wrong, then darkening the understanding is not difficult to do.
Right.
Because now it's like what used to be wrong is right. What used to be right is now wrong. And in talking about darkening, it's like we are living in a situation now in the world and also in America, obviously, where that people have no concept of what's right or what's wrong anymore, and generally speaking in our population. And the agenda has been to make our thinking futile and to darken our understanding. And in my lifetime, it's been very clear. I'm sure Phil has seen it. You guys are even old enough to have seen it.
Yeah.
That the way that people think doesn't make sense anymore. Yeah. And we have gotten to the point where that the only thing is right is what I want.
Yeah.
Now, when you get to that futility, look what he says here when he says, first of all, that darkness of their thinking. Basically, that phrase there is a phrase, when we look for it, and as you guys know, because you're Bible students, when you find a phrase like that, you say, okay, what does it mean? You look also in the writings of that same epistle, and you don't find it there. Then you look in the writings of Paul, and you don't find it there. Then you look in the New Testament, and you don't find it there. That phrase used again. So you wind up looking into classical Greek literature and literature of the day. And basically what he says is they're feeling no pain. Having lost all sensitivity, they're feeling no pain. And that's what we have done. Way back in the 70s, a book came out called Whatever Happened to Sin. And the guy who wrote it was a psychiatrist / philosopher, going blank on his name right now, Menninger maybe. He wrote that and said, what's happening is, rather than telling people that, yes, guilt is telling you this wrong, you should stop it, we have moved over to telling them you shouldn't feel guilty about it because it's true for you. And therefore, we're going to get it where they feel no pain. Mm-hmm. And now, if I walked into a room and saw somebody over there who had been drinking, for example, and I said, he's feeling no pain, we would all think that means he is now out of it.
Yeah.
He has gotten to the point where he doesn't know how to feel anymore. And so not only can you do that to yourself from chemicals like alcohol, cocaine, etc., you can do that to yourself from just your emotions. Yeah. To where you can become so hardened that your heart is so hard to anything but what you want that you really don't feel pain, which when I was in college back, I went to college with Sigmund Freud, and I'm that old. When I was in college, we would say that would be a sociopath, a person who feels no pain when they hurt other people and doesn't understand why the other people hurt. Well, we've become a sociopathic society.
Yeah.
And the brilliance of that, if you think about it, it took years to get us where we are.
Yeah.
And it's affecting right down to children, so that now they want to be confusing the children's thinking.
Yep.
Are you a boy? Are you a girl? Are you this? Are you that? And so that strategy listed in that passage is very applicable today. Yeah. And that's why people wind up, the continual lust for more is you finally don't have any genuine emotions left. All of it's been this artificial stuff by this or that or this other thing that I'm seeking. And because that's not fulfilling, I'll drink more, or I'll fornicate more, or I'll do more, whatever it is, trying to find, it's almost like chasing the high that the crack addict has.
Right.
It gave me a high once, I'm still after it, because the genuine emotions of love and care, they're gone.
Yeah.
And that person who buys into this stuff altogether, because it's really become all about them. So in my opinion, that passage is just as true today as it ever was.
Yeah.
Well said.
So, Jace, you get a lot of packages at your house like I do?
Every day. Most of it's my wife's doing.
Yeah, and it's hard for me, I don't know about you, Jace, but it's hard for me to get too excited about my wife's packages. I don't even want to open them. When they have her name on them, I just set them aside. But there's one that comes to me every month that I am excited about, and it's from our friends at Bespoke Post. They call it the Box of Awesome because it's chosen gear from some of the best small brands around the world. And it's kind of a little surprise package that comes to me every month. And so that one I look for and I'm excited about getting. This summer, of course, they kind of go by seasons. So you have like a summer season. I went online and I told them the kind of things I like, which is cooking, grilling, things like that. And so they send me all kind of cool stuff. I get pocket knives, I get grill, things for my grill and different kind of spatulas and things like this. Really exciting. And so I look forward to it. If you want to check them out, you go to boxofawesome.com. You're going to take a quiz, and they're going to figure out the best box of awesome for you. And then every month, they're going to send you this box. It's going to cross different categories. The box is valued at around $70, but you're only going to pay a fraction of that. So you're getting a good deal. You're also supporting small businesses, which we love. 90% of everything that comes in your box of awesome is from small up-and-coming brands, which we love that as well. It's free to sign up. You can skip a month or cancel anytime, so you're not locked into anything long-term. Check them out. Get 20% off your first monthly box when you sign up at boxofawesome.com. Enter the code PHIL at checkout. That's boxofawesome.com. Use the code PHIL for 20% off your first box. Check them out, boxofawesome.com. Use the code PHIL. And written 2,000 years ago, and yet you still see that cycle, as you mentioned it. And you're right, we're seeing it more. We've always seen it in individual lives. You know, someone you're working with, someone's trying to come out of this terrible place they're in. But you're right, Joe. I think we're seeing now more of a cultural rot of this same mindset. And it's why people will say things you think, how could people get to this place in their thinking? And obviously that explains why.